I think a fast review of chapter 4 and beginning of chapter 5 probably is well in order because we're looking at the theology of Eliphaz, what he believes is to be the theology that he follows. Again, maybe it's even better to go back one step further. Remember, he made an appointment along with other friends to come and see Job. And they sat with him for 7 days and 7 nights silently. No accusations, no advice or anything else. And they came with good intentions. And I think a lot of people do that. They'll come to people with good intentions. But after the 7 days of silence, Eliphaz starts to espouse his theology. Now, he had some of it pretty good and some of it pretty bad. So let's take a look at that again. Chapter 4, there is a God. There's no question that Eliphaz believes there's a God. Number 2, that no one is righteous. And we know by the New Testament that's correct. No one is righteous, not one. God will judge everyone. And we know that that's true. He will judge everyone. And don't count on your righteousness to get into heaven. That's your own good works. He had that down pretty well. And he even kind of rebuked Job, and he said, you've given good advice and you've given good counsel to a lot of people, done a lot of good. Now you need to practice what you preach. That wasn't such good advice, but we all ought to practice what we preach. Now, what did he say wrong in chapter 4 with theology? Man gets what he deserves. Well, that's not really true. If man got what he deserved, we'd all wind up perishing. But he was relating it to if you sin, the consequences are punishment, and what Job was going through was probably because of sin. And he went further than that. He said, no one suffers except that he sins. And the only reason for suffering is sin. So he got that all wrong. And he says, I observed everything that's gone on around me, and I have it all down just right. I have my doctrine and my theology exactly right. I beg to differ. I think all of us have areas of our theology which need a further examination. But in any case, in chapter 5, he says that man's a sinner, and he is, and he should seek God, and he should, and that he should accept discipline, and we know that that's true. And then he goes on in verses 18 through 26, and he talks about the greatness of God. And if that's all you knew about Eliphaz, you'd say, well, you know, his doctrine's pretty good. But in chapter 5, he got a lot of things wrong again. Sin is always the cause of afflictions and troubles and problems, and that's not true. Job is getting what he deserves. Well, we know that that's not true, but we have the foresight of having scripture that tells us that God is allowing Job to be tested by Satan. And then the third thing that he gets wrong is that man was born for trouble. No, man was born to glorify God. And finally, he says, and I know all about God with a certainty. And when we think that we have God figured out 100%, I think we're being very presumptuous, that I don't think God is that easy to understand all about everything that he does and why he does it. In any case, we come into chapter 6, and as you can imagine, just as we would if we were charged with having sinned, and that's why we're getting what we're getting, Job starts to defend himself, some self-justification. Now, we know Job was not perfect. And we do know that he was a very righteous man according to the scriptures, but we know he wasn't perfect. We know there was only one perfect person. And so as we see Job here, he looks at his iniquity and he compares it with the amount of suffering that he's going through, and he says, it just doesn't add up. I may have some shortcomings, but I've never done anything that I should deserve this much punishment, this much calamity, this much problem. And of course, he is coming across a little bit, I'm sure, to Eliphaz as being self-righteous, and since Eliphaz has a theology of sin begets tribulation, he must think that Job's a pretty bad sinner and has done something pretty significant. But Job continues to justify and to say, just look and measure and watch and see and check my reputation and everything about me, and you'll know that I don't deserve all that I'm going through. Stop judging me and start examining my life and see if you can give me any real counsel of what I might possibly have done that would bring all this calamity on me, because it certainly wasn't measured in accordance with my lifestyle. So we find the charges that Eliphaz is making, we find the justification and the concern that Job has that that can't be it, because he's already examined and looked at his life and his conduct, and he just doesn't see anything that would start to justify the amount of calamity that he's experienced. Interesting, isn't it? As we think about the fact that we need to justify ourselves, but it's not a bad idea to examine ourselves whenever trouble comes into our lives. As a matter of fact, I remember one of the most meaningful things that I ever did was a sheet of paper that we were given when we were in a couples retreat that said, examine yourself, and it had a bunch of scriptures talking about things that we could be doing or could not be doing, that we should be or shouldn't be doing. And it was called self-examination or self-searching, and it was a very meaningful sheet of paper. As a matter of fact, I continue to keep one of those anytime somebody wants to talk about prayer and examining oneself. That's a really good sheet to show that none of us come close to what we ought to be. In any case, perhaps Job didn't have that kind of a piece of paper to see if there was anything that he needed to confess, and all he could really see was that it seemed that all of the suffering he was going through was not appropriate for the amount of sin that might be in his life, and that his iniquities didn't start to measure up to the suffering and the tribulation that he was having. And I think all of us need to remember that. I think we need to remember that many bad things happen to good people, and we should never judge and believe that it's brought on themselves because of their sinful condition. So it's going to be interesting as we watch these conversations between Job and his friends, who came with good intentions, but now are trying to find fault with Job. And while they give them some good advice and have some theology which seems to be in line with Scripture, their theology of sin begets tribulation, and good righteousness deserves good life. And we know that experientially, we know scripturally from all of the different characters and situations that we can study in the Scripture that that does not follow suit. And that's my thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.